Hello everyone. Welcome back to another session of this Extensions 101 webinar series. In our last two sessions, we explored building extensions for the product Zoho Projects, where we saw features like connections, widgets, model boxes, and how effectively these features can be incorporated while you're building the extension. So in today's session, we are going to be covering another important concept called as data storage and its uses while building an extension. So the focus of today's webinar topic is going to be the feature data storage and its significance while you're building an extension for Zoho projects. So we're going to see how data storage can be utilized while you're building widgets as part of your Zoho projects extension. So since our previous sessions focused on the topics widget and model boxes, we'll be starting off with a quick recollection on the concept widgets and model box, followed by which we'll enter into the topic for today, which is data storage. So we'll see an introduction to the concept data storage, followed by the different types of data storage that are available and when these different types of data storage can be used. Then we'll see the methods that are supported by Zoho projects to handle this data storage concept as part of your extension. And finally, we'll conclude with an example use case demonstration of building the Zoho projects extension, where we'll be predominantly using the concepts like data storage, widgets, and model box. So this is the agenda that is planned for today's session. So let me start with a quick recap on what is widgets and model box. So as we saw, widgets are customizable user interfaces that help you to provide a seamless experience for the end user who's using your extension or application. And this model box concept is an enhancement to the widgets feature. So we know that in general, you can build widgets and embed them in different locations in your Zoho Projects account. But if you want a pop-up or a dialog box UI to open up from your parent widget, then that can be achieved using the model box feature. So when the model box feature is open, the specialty of using model box is that when that UI is going to be open, that becomes your currently active screen and it deactivates all the other contents in the background screen. So I've just included certain screenshots for you all to recollect on how widgets and model box will look. So this is my Zoho Projects account, where I have a widget in the projects tab location called as desk open tickets. So this is a normal widget which is embedded in the project tab location in my Zoho Projects account. So as part of this parent widget, we are going to allow the end user to choose a desk ticket which is associated with them. So I'm displaying all the Zoho desk tickets associated with that particular project agent, and I'm going to allow the end user to choose a particular ticket. So when they click on the get ticket details button, they can be prompted with the dialog box UI, which is going to be a model box UI, which showcases information specific to the ticket that was chosen by the end user in the parent widget. So here you can see that when this model box UI is active, it deactivates all the other contents in the background screen. So the end user will not be able to perform any other operations in the background screen until and unless this model box is closed. So this is a parent widget, and the pop-up UI that appears from the parent widget is going to be referred as the model box UI. So this was a quick overview on the concept of widgets and model boxes. We'll be exploring this, or we'll be utilizing these concepts as part of our use case demonstration for data storage as well today. So with these pointers in mind, let's enter into the focus for today, which is going to be the concept data storage. So just like the term refers to, data storage means storing data related to the extension that you're developing. So let's say you're building an extension and you want to store some data related to that extension so that you can later fetch the data in order to perform future or further extension functionalities. So in that case, storage of the data related to the extension can be achieved or handled using this data storage concept. So where can you store this data? You can store the data either against an entity or an extension. So when I'm referring to entity over here, I'm essentially mentioning the modules which are available in Zoho projects. So there are multiple modules like task, issues, and so on, right? So you can either store data specific to a particular entity or a module, or you can store data against the entire extension itself. So both this is possible by using this data storage concept. So we also need to know the format in which you need to store the data. So you can store data either against an entity or an extension, but using which format will you store this data? That has to be done in a key value pair format. So the key is essentially going to be a unique string identifier of your choice. You can provide any key, but it has to be a unique string identifier. And the value is going to be the data that you store against this key. So that value or the data that you're going to store, right, it has to be constructed in a JSON object format. So this is an overview of data storage where we've seen that you can store data related to the extension that you're developing. So data can be stored either against an entity, which is a module, or against the entire extension itself. And the format in which you need to store the data either across the entity or the extension is going to be in a key value pair format. So next we are going to explore the different types of data storage which are available in detail. So as we saw in the previous slide, you can either store data against an extension or against an entity, right? So let's start with the first thing, which is going to be entity data storage property. So if you want to store data specific to a particular module so that it can be later retrieved as part of that module itself in order to perform further functionalities, then that can be achieved using the entity data storage concept. So let's say you're working on a task, okay? So you're going to ask the end user to provide some input, and that input that the end user is going to provide is going to be stored against that entity. So here task module is going to be referred as the task entity. So when the data is going to be stored against that specific entity, later if you want to fetch that data as part of that task module itself so that you can perform any further operations, then that can be achieved using this entity data storage concept. So currently, Zoho Projects supports 4 modules using which you can handle data storage for entities. So the 4 modules are going to be projects, tasks, issues, and milestones. So you can store data against these 4 modules using the entity data storage concept. So another advantage of using the entity data storage is going to be, even if the extension is going to be uninstalled, so the extension that you've developed, right? Even if that extension is going to be uninstalled, the data that you've stored against that entity using the key value format, right, that will still be retained as part of your key. So you're storing the data against an entity in a key value format. So even if the extension using which the data was stored is going to be uninstalled, that data will still be retained against that unique key that you have stored. So that's a benefit of using the entity data storage concept. There are a couple of limitations as well. So let's say you have some concurrent updates that you're doing to the same key, then only the latest data that was updated will be reflected. So if you have 2 users as part of the same Zoho Projects portal, then whatever data the second user, let's say the same example that we took, right? If a user is working on a task, they've stored some data against a key. Then if another user works on the same task and if they store the data against that key, the latest data will only be reflected and updated. So concurrent updates will have only the latest data updated. And also a maximum of 50 KBs can be only stored against a specific key. So if you're storing the data in a key value format against a specific key, you can go ahead and store a maximum of 50 KBs only. So this is with respect to entity data storage. Next, we are going to see the specifics and the benefits of using extension data storage concept. So with entity, we saw that you can store the data specific to a particular entity so that it can be later retrieved as part of that entity itself to perform future operations, right? But when it comes to extension, the data can be stored against the entire extension or application. So this data is going to be globally stored so that it can globally be accessed as part of any other widget location in the extension. So let's say you're storing the data as part of a top band widget. If you're using the extension data storage concept, then the data will be stored at extension level. So later, that data can be fetched in another widget location as well in order to perform further functionalities. So that's the benefit of using extension data storage concept. But when it comes to extension data storage, since the data is going to be stored against the extension or application itself, when the extension is going to be uninstalled, the data that was stored against that particular extension will also be lost. So that's the difference when it comes to entity and extension. So since the data is going to be stored across the entire extension itself, the data, when the extension is going to be uninstalled, the data stored against that particular application will also be lost. And when it comes to limitations, it's the same limitations as that of entity. So when you have concurrent updates, the latest data will only be reflected, and a maximum of 50 KBs can be stored against a specific key. Additionally, when it comes to extension data storage, you can store 100 key value pairs for extension data storage. So if you're developing an extension and you want to store some data against that extension, then a maximum of 100 key value pairs can be used to store data against that extension. So these were the specifics related to entity data storage and extension data storage concept. So what I've done is I've included certain real-time use cases also for you all to relate better to where entity can be used and where extension data storage can be used. So that's what we're going to see next. So the first real-time example that I've taken is for entity data storage. So here you can see that this is a task module or task entity available in my Zoho Projects account. So I have a widget in the task module called a Zoho Assist session. So in Zoho, we have a product called a Zoho Assist, which will help you to enter into a remote session or a screen sharing session with your end user. So we've incorporated that product's functionality as a widget inside the task module for a Zoho Projects product. So in this task widget, what we are going to do is we are going to allow the project agent to enter into the remote session of the customer. So here you can see that in this widget, I'm requesting or I'm allowing the end user to want to enter into a remote session with a customer, then they can go ahead and click on the start remote session button. So when the agent who's working on this particular task clicks on the start remote session button, they are going to be prompted with a model box UI, which intimates them that the remote session is created and they are going to enter into a remote session with the below customer. So when they click here to proceed, they will be redirected to the Zoho Assist page where they'll be entering into a remote session with a customer. So from within the task that the project agent is working on itself, they will be able to enter into a remote session with the end user of the particular task that they are working on. So here, you can see that you might enter into multiple remote sessions with the same end user for this particular task itself. So when you're working on a task, you might first want to enter into a remote session to gather requirements from the end user, right? So after you've implemented the particular request that the end user wanted, you can go ahead into another remote sharing or a screen sharing session to showcase the execution or demonstration of the feature that you've implemented. So in this way, you might have to enter into multiple remote sharing sessions with the same end user. So as a project agent, it would be convenient if you could have all the sessions that you've entered into with this particular, for a remote session with this particular customer, available as part of the same task that you're working on, right? So you can store these sessions that you've entered as a remote session with the customer and have it displayed as part of the same task itself so that you have a reference of the sessions that you've entered with this customer. So this concept can be achieved using the entity data storage concept. So here, these sessions that you're entering with the end user are specific to the particular task that you're working alone, right? So you can store the data against this specific task module or task entity so that next time when this parent widget loads, when your Zoho Assist session widget loads, you can retrieve the data that you've stored against this specific entity and have them displayed as a drop-down list. So every time you enter into a session using the start remote session button, the session will be created and a session ID will be generated in the background. That ID can be stored against the specific entity that you're working on using entity data storage concept. So in a key value format, you can go ahead and store the IDs against a specific key. So the next time the parent widget loads, you can go ahead and showcase the previous assist sessions that you've gone with the end user as part of this widget itself. So whatever data was stored against this entity can be retrieved as part of this entity itself in order to perform further operations. So here you can see that we're providing the project agent with the benefit of seeing the previous assist sessions that they've gone with the customer. So they can choose a particular ID, click on the Get Session Details button, which will prompt them to another model box UI where they can see the details specific to the previous session that they've entered with the end user. So in this way, we are allowing them to start a remote session with the end user as well as showcase them the previous sessions that they've entered with the same customer. So here, entity data storage plays a major role when you want to store some data specific to this particular entity so that it can be later retrieved in order as part of the same entity to perform further operations. So this was the use case that we've seen which showcases the benefit of using entity data storage concept. So next, I've also included another real-time use case for extension data storage concept. So in general, when you're handling your extensions or building your widgets, you can have some feedback or review templates as part of your extension itself, right? So when we are doing feedback or review templates, usually we provide the question and the answer choices hard-coded as part of the extension itself. But let's say we are providing the choice to the end user to give their own question for feedback and the answer choices for that feedback question as well. So that's the use case that we've taken over here for extension data storage. So this is the top band location which is available in our Zoho Projects account. So as part of this top band location, I've created a template called as feedback or review template setting. So here I'm going to allow the end user to provide their own feedback question as an input and the answer choices that they want to give for the feedback question as well. So see, you can see that enter your feedback or review question for a task or issue. So let's say when you usually feedback or review are got for tasks or issues that the project agent is working on, right? So I've utilized this particular feedback or review question for a task or issue. So let's say the end user gives the question as what was the job's level of ease? After which we are also allowing the end user to provide the choices that they want to populate for this particular question. So we are going to ask them to enter the options to be populated for their feedback or review question and then click on add. So let's say they're giving the choices for the question, what was the job's level of ease as easy, difficult or hard. So once they click on add, this data, that is the question and the answer choices that are provided by the end user, can be stored at extension level using the extension data storage concept. So now that the question and the answer choices are stored at extension level, they can be retrieved in any other widget location as part of the extension to perform further functionalities. So we want the feedback to be available as part of a task or issue module so that when the agent completes a task, they can go ahead and provide a feedback for the task or issue, right? So using that extension level data that has been stored in your task entity, you can go ahead and retrieve that question and answer which was stored at extension level and then display it in a Q&A format in your task module. So here the data was stored at extension level, so it can later be retrieved in any other widget location of your extension. So in my task module, I've created a widget called as feedback or review. I've retrieved the data which was stored at extension level. So the question and the answer choices provided by the end user are retrieved over here and displayed in a Q&A format. So now when the project agent completes a particular task or issue, they can go ahead and provide a review for the particular task that they worked on. So as an enhancement to this use case itself, let me tell you how you can use the entity data storage concept as well. So we stored the question and answer choices at extension level and retrieved it in the task module, right? Now, if the project agent provides a review for this particular task that they are working on, then this choice that was provided by the end user as a feedback for this task is specific to this task alone, right? So whatever review that they are going to give over here is the review that is specific to this task alone. So next time when the project agent enters inside this task, they should be able to see the review that they had earlier provided for this task. So in that case, whatever value is chosen by the project agent as the review can be stored at entity level so that that value can be stored against this specific task. So the next time this particular widget loads, that is, if let's say the project agent enters into this task again, then whatever data was stored at entity level, that is the choice that was provided by the project agent will be stored at entity level, right? That can be retrieved for this entity itself and displayed again to the user. So as part of the same use case, we've seen how extension level data storage can be utilized and entity level data storage can be utilized. So these were a couple of real-time use cases that we wanted to showcase to mention where or the significance of when and where entity and extension data storage can be used. So next, we are going to see the methods which are supported by the Zoho projects to handle this data storage concept as part of your extension. So let me just enter into the help document provided by Zoho projects. So this is the help documentation that is provided by Zoho projects, where they've mentioned about the methods supported to handle entity level data storage and extension level data storage. So as part of this page, you can see that there are certain methods which are available for entity data storage, and there are certain methods available for extension data storage as well. So irrespective of whether it's going to be storing data at entity level or extension level, there are 4 major operations that you can perform related to the data storage concept. So those 4 operations are going to be storing the data, retrieving the data, updating the data, and removing the stored data. So those are the methods that I've consolidated as part of our slide over here. So here you can see that the 4 operations that can be performed for data storage, whether it's going to be at entity or extension level, is going to be store, which is going to help you to store the data in a key value format. Retrieve, which is going to help you to retrieve the data that you've stored against a specific key. Update is, let's say there might be scenarios where you've already stored a data against a key and then you want to update the data that you've stored against that specific key. That can be achieved using this update method. And finally, you have remove. So if you want to remove the data that you've stored against a key, then that can be done using this remove method. So these 4 operations can be done either against an entity or against an extension for data storage concept. But when we're invoking these methods as part of our widget code, for entity, the method names, and for extension, the methods names will differ. So that's what we're going to see next. So when it comes to entity, for these methods that you're going to perform, these data operations that you're going to perform, the keyword entity will be prefixed with them. So you can see that entity.store, entity.retrieve, entity.update, and entity.remove. So you need to use these method names in order to invoke this specific functionality as part of your widget when it comes to entity level data storage. When you're going to go ahead and do extension level data storage, the operations are going to be same, but the method name is going to be prefixed with the keyword app. So just like for entity, it was prefixed with entity. When it comes to extension level data storage, since the data is going to be stored against the entire extension or application that you're developing, you have to prefix the operations name with the keyword app. So it will be app.store, app.retrieve, app.update, and app.remove. So these are the 4 methods which are supported for data storage, whether it comes to entity or extension level data. Now, we essentially have to use these particular methods in our widget code only, right? So we are going to use this data storage concept while handling widgets as part of our Zoho Projects extension. So I've just included the format in which each of these methods will have to be invoked, whether it's entity or extension, as part of our next slide. So here on the left hand side, I have the entity methods which are available, and in the right hand side, we have extension level methods which are available. So first, let's start with entity data storage methods. So the first method is going to be storing the data related to an entity, right? So that can be done using the entity.store method, as we saw earlier. So we're going to invoke Zoho projects.entity.store, and we saw that if you want to store some data, it has to be done in a key value format. So this is going to be the unique string identifier, and the value is going to be constructed, or the data that's going to be stored against the key, it has to be constructed in a JSON object format. So this is a sample key that we provided over here. You can give any unique key string identifier of your choice. So the data needs to be constructed in a key value format. So once you construct the data in this format and invoke the entity.store method, as part of the response for this invocation of this method, an ID will be generated. So you're constructing the data that needs to be stored at entity level using key value format and invoking the entity.store method. So once that's invoked, an ID will be generated as part of the method's response. We'll later see where this ID will be helpful when we are invoking the other data storage operations. Okay. So additionally, there's also another optional parameter called as count. So key and value are mandatory parameters that needs to be constructed in order to invoke entity.store. However, count is an optional parameter. So if you want to count the number of occurrences that have been stored against the specific key, then in that case you can go and include this count parameter. So you have to remember that this count parameter will have to be initialized and handled at code level. So if you include this count parameter, then whatever value is available for this count will be displayed as a number next to that entity level widget's name. So for entity data storage only, this count will be applicable. So if you include this count parameter, so let's say you're including count parameter, initializing the value to 1 and then handling its incrementation at code level. So every time the data is stored against a specific key, an account has to be incremented at code level. So whatever value is currently available at the count parameter will be reflected as a number next to that particular entity's widget name. So this is an optional parameter. If you include it, then the number will be available next to the widget's name. So this is with respect to entity.store, where you have to construct the data in a key value format, and then the count parameter can be included as an optional parameter if required. Also, as a response for this entity.store method, an ID will be generated. So next method is going to be entity.retrieve, which is going to help to retrieve the data that you've stored against a key. So if you want to retrieve the data that you've stored against a key, then that can be done using the entity.retrieve method followed by the key which you have used. So this key is going to be the key with which you have stored the data. And then you have the update method. So let's say if you want to update some data that you stored against a specific entity using the key value format, then in that case you can go ahead and use the entity.update method. So what are the params that you need to pass if you want to update the value that you've stored against a specific key? So you'll have to store the key, the value. So the key is going to be the key using which you have stored the data. The value is going to be the value that you're going to update for this particular key. So the updated value has to be constructed as a JSON object and passed to this value parameter. Along with the key and the value, you will need to pass the ID which was generated when the data was stored using entity.store. So this is where this ID plays a role. So when you're storing the data against a key, right, an ID will be generated in the response. So that ID has to be passed along with the key and the value when you want to update the data that you've stored against a specific key. So also count, if you provide the count value, it's an optional parameter. So the mandatory parameters to update the data are key, value and ID. Count, if you want, you can go ahead and include it. Finally, if you want to remove the data that you've stored against a specific key, then you can go ahead and use the entity.remove method. And for the remove method, the parameter that you need to pass is going to be the ID that was generated when you stored the data. So for storage, it's a key value format. For retrieving, you need to pass the key using which you stored the data. For updating, you need to pass the key value along with the ID that was generated when you stored that particular key. And finally, when it comes to remove, you need to pass the ID which was generated when you stored the data against a key. So this is the format in which these methods can be invoked as part of your widget code while you're building the Zoho Projects extension. So the same format will apply for extension level data storage as well, but the method name alone will differ. So the method name will be prefixed with the keyword app. So when it comes to extension level data storage, it's going to be app.store followed by the key value format. For retrieve, it's going to be app.retrieve followed by the key. For update, it's going to be the key, the updated value along with the ID that was generated when the data was stored. Finally, for remove, it's going to be app.remove followed by the ID that was generated when the data was stored against the key. So these are the methods that are supported by Zoho Projects to handle data storage either against an entity or an extension level while you're building the widget. So next we'll be seeing use case demonstrations for both entity and extension data storage. Okay, so let me start with the first example demonstration, which is for the entity storage concept. So for this example, we've taken an integration between Zoho Projects and Zoho CRM. So let's say you're running a business and you're developing a product as part of this business. So for this product that you've developed, you're running the sales cycle for that particular product using your Zoho CRM. So CRM is usually customer relationship management, right? To handle customer relationship management. So the sales cycle for our particular product is going to be handled using CRM. So once you've developed a product and the end users start using your product, right, they might have certain enhancement requests or feature requests for the product that you've developed. So whatever enhancement request or feature request the end users are going to bring up are going to be logged as a cases module in CRM. So in CRM, we have a module called as cases, which can be utilized to log these particular cases or issues that are brought up by customers. So let's say you have feature request or enhancement request logged as cases in Zoho CRM. So essentially, you will have to work on a particular enhancement request so that you can provide a resolution to the customer, right? So that particular working of this enhancement request raised by the customer can be done as a task in Zoho Projects. So since our projects, Zoho Projects is a project management hub, this enhancement request can be handled as a task in Zoho Projects. So when a project agent is going to work on a feature request as a task in Zoho Projects, it would be convenient if they could have the associated CRM cases related to this particular feature request that they're working on available in the task itself. So let's say customer A comes up with a case stating that they want the speed of the particular product to be enhanced. There could be multiple other customers like customer B and C also might want the speed of the product to be enhanced as well. So these three customer requests will be raised as three cases in Zoho CRM. But the feature request, that is the task that is going to be worked on, is going to be a single task in Zoho Projects, right? So when the project agent completes working on this feature request, if they can have all the associated CRM cases related to this feature request available within the task itself, then it would be easier for them to update, to check on the cases which are relevant to this particular feature request that they've worked on and update those end users accordingly. So that's the use case that we're trying to achieve using entity data storage. So that the points that we've just discussed are what I've jotted over here. So it's going to be an integration between projects and CRM. So there could be feature or enhancement requests submitted by customers in CRM as cases, and those can be processed as tasks in Zoho Projects. So we are going to display all the associated CRM cases inside Zoho Projects so that every CRM case which is associated to that feature request will be available in the single task. So this will ease the work of the project agent who's working on it. So I've included sample output screenshots as well. So this is how our output functionality would occur. So this is a task. So let's say they are working on a feature request to upgrade the speed, right? So as part of this task itself, they can have a widget called as CRM cases. So initially the associated CRM cases are none. We are going to display them with all their Zoho CRM cases which are open. So the project agent gets to choose a particular case, click on the get case details button, which will prompt them with the details specific to the particular case as a model box UI. So once they view the details of that particular case, if they find that case related or relevant to the feature request that they're working on, then they can click on associate case with the task button. So here you can see this in the description, it's related to the microprocessor product, and in the internal comments, it's a feature request for upgrading the microprocessor speed. So this case is relevant to the feature request that they are working on, right? So they can associate the case with the task. So over here, now that the case is going to be associated with this specific task, this case ID can be stored using the entity data storage concept against the specific task that they're working on. So next time when this particular widget loads, the case which they had associated with the task can be retrieved using the entity data storage concept and displayed under associated CRM cases section. So in this way, they can go ahead and check out the other cases as well. And if they find any case relevant to the task that they are working on, they can go ahead and associate them to this particular task. So once they have a list over here, we've also provided them with a hyperlink over here. So after they've completed the feature request, they can directly redirect to that particular case page in CRM and provide a resolution to the customer. So this is the use case that we are going to achieve. Next, we are going to see the components or the data flow which is going to be occurring as part of this particular example use case. So here we saw, right, in the sample outputs, there were two widgets. One is going to be a parent widget for CRM cases, and the next is going to be the model box widget, which displays details specific to that particular case. So let's see how data is going to flow between these two widgets using the model box and the data storage concept. So the first point that we are going to do is we are going to allow the end user to select a case from the drop down list. So all their CRM cases which are available or open to them in CRM will be displayed in a drop down. So we are allowing the end user to select a particular case. Next, a model box has to be opened and the value or the details specific to that particular case that was chosen by the end user in the parent widget has to be displayed over here, right? So in our previous sessions, while we discussed about model box, we saw that there are methods to create a model box and emit the data to the model box. So using those model.create and model.emit methods, a model box will be created and the case ID which was chosen by the end user in the parent widget will be emitted or thrown to the model box UI. So once that case ID is thrown to the model box UI, in the model box widgets end, that particular model box UI will have to receive that case ID which was emitted by the parent widget so that you can go ahead and display details specific to the particular case that was chosen. So using the model.on method, you can go ahead and receive the data in the model box end. So we've described in detail about each of these model box methods as part of our previous session. So using these methods only, we've gone ahead and handled creating a model box, emitting data to the model box and receiving the data in the model box end. So once that case ID which was thrown from the parent widget is received in the model box, details relevant to that specific case are displayed in the model box UI. So now the project agent or the end user is going to view those particular details, right? So once they view those details, if they find it relevant to the task that they're working on, they are going to associate it with the task. So when they click on associate case with the task button, you want to store this case ID specific to that particular task so that it can be later retrieved and displayed in the associated CRM cases section, right? So to store the data against a specific entity, we saw that we can go ahead and do it using the entity.store method. So that's what we are going to do over here. We are going to store the data or associate that case with a specific task by storing that case ID using entity.store. So once now the data stored against a specific entity, you can go ahead and retrieve it as part of that same entity. So when this parent widget loads again, you can use the entity.retrieve method to retrieve that case detail that was stored against a specific task and have it displayed under the associated CRM cases section. So in this way, we've utilized widgets, model box and data storage concept, entity data storage concept as part of this same use case. So this was the data flow. So essentially, in order to set up this extension, we would require certain components. So the components that we require over here are majorly two, which is connections and widgets. So since we are going to transfer or push data between CRM and Zoho projects, the data transfer has to be secure. So we saw about connections in our earlier session, right? So in that format, using that method, we've created a connection between projects and CRM. So that's the first component. The second component is going to be widgets. So just like we saw in our previous slide, two widgets are going to be involved. One is the parent widget and the other one is the model box widget. So in the parent widget, we need to get all the cases that are open for the project agent in CRM and display it as part of a drop down, right? For doing that, you need to invoke the Zoho CRM API to get all the CRM case records. So we saw in our earlier session while discussing widgets that if you want to invoke a third-party application API as part of your widget script, then that can be done using the request.js SDK method. So I've used the request.js SDK method to invoke the CRM API to get all the CRM case records and display it in a drop-down list. So after this is done in the parent widget, the rest of the flow we saw in our previous slide. The model box will be created, data will be emitted. Now in the model box UI, that data will be received, that is the case will be received and details specific to that particular case will have to be displayed. So you'll have to invoke another CRM API to get details specific to a particular case. So again, we'll be using the request.js SDK method as part of the model box UI as well to invoke the Zoho CRM API to get a specific case record by its ID. So once we do that, details specific to that particular case can be displayed. Then if they find it relevant, they are going to associate it. Data will be stored using entity.store, which can later be retrieved using entity.retrieve in order to perform our further functionalities. So using these components that are required, we've already set up an extension in our Sigma platform. So let me just go to my Sigma platform and let me open the extension that I've created. So this is the extension that I've created where we've set up the components required for the use case that we just discussed. So here in the plugin manifest file, the connection that I've created for between Zoho Projects and CRM, right? That connection's value is configured over here for the connectors key. After which we have a widget. So our parent widget's name is going to be CRM cases, right? And that's going to be available in the task tab. So that particular widget is also configured over here. So the model box widget will not have to be configured in the plugin manifest file because it's essentially going to be a pop-up from this parent widget only. So any widget which is going to be embedded in a particular location in your Zoho Projects account, that widget will only have to be configured in the plugin manifest file over here. The model box or the pop-up UI, that widget does not need to be configured in the plugin manifest file. So this is the plugin manifest file configuration. We've also handled the code for both the parent widget and the child widget over here. So we've written this example use case as a forum post where we've attached the code snippets in detail. So, at the end of the session, Vinod will be sharing the forum post links with you. So once the session is completed, you can go ahead and have the code snippet attached as part of the forum post to take a line by line detail of it. So for now, I'm going to showcase the importance of where we've used data storage over here alone. So as part of my child widget, that is the model box UI only, we saw that if the case details are relevant, on click of the associate case with the task button, we want to store that case ID to that specific task, right? So for on that button functionality in my child widget, I've used the entity.store method and constructed a key value format to store that particular case against this task. So here, this is the key that I've used and the value is a JSON object that I've created. So here I have the JSON object where here the key's name is associated case number, and this associated case number value is essentially the case details which was chosen by the end user in the parent widget. So that value is what, whatever case ID was chosen by them, details relevant to that case only displayed in the model box UI, right? So that case number is what I have constructed as the value over here and stored it against this specific key. So once I've stored it over here, next time the parent widget loads, right? That is the CRM cases parent widget loads, you can go ahead and use the entity.retrieve method. So for retrieve, we saw that we need to pass the parameter as the key with which you stored the data. So I've used the same key over here. So once I've retrieved the data, that is the cases related or stored against that specific case, I can go ahead and fetch all those cases and display it in the format as a list under the associated CRM cases section. So here, as part of this example, we've used entity.store and entity.retrieve to handle entity level data storage. So let me just run this extension to show you all the sample output in real time. So we saw, right, using this run button, you can test your extension functionalities in a testing portal before you publish and install the extension in your Zoho Projects account. So I've just used the run option in the Sigma Cloud Editor to enter into my testing portal over here. So this is our testing portal. Our functionality is available in a task tab. So let me enter into a task module. So let's enter into a relevant task. So I have a feature request over here. So if I enter into this feature request, I have the module widget called as CRM cases, right? So currently there are no associated CRM cases. So here, but I can view all my open Zoho CRM case records over here. So let's say this case is something related to microprocessor speed, right? If I click on the get case details button, the model box UI is popped up. Let's just give it a time. Yeah, so you can see the data was loading slowly. So we've just loaded it again. So the details specific to that particular CRM case has been loaded over here. So here in the description, you can see that this is related to the microprocessor product and it's a feature request for upgrading the microprocessor speed. So this is essentially related. This case is related to the feature request that the project agent is working on. So they can click on the associate case with the task button. And once they have associated the case with the task, the next time this parent widget loads, you can see that that data which was stored, right, has been retrieved and displayed over here. So in the same way, if they find another case relevant to this particular task or the feature request that they're working on, so there's something related to speed again over here. So if they click on this and find this particular case relevant to the task as well, so this is also related to the microprocessor speed. So when I click on associate case with the task, the next time the widget loads, that data will be stored against the specific key. So when it's retrieved, both the cases are now retrieved over here. So once the project agent completes working on this particular feature request, they can directly go ahead and enter into the Zoho CRM case record. So we've given a hyperlink as well. So in this way, they can go ahead and provide a solution or a solution to this end user stating that the feature request has been completed. So when they have all the associated CRM cases related to this feature request over here itself, it makes it convenient for them to go ahead, redirect to that particular case and provide a resolution for it. So this is the example that we've taken for entity level data storage, where the significance over here is that data related or data specific to a particular task can be stored using the entity.store method so that it can be later retrieved as part of that entity itself to perform further operations. The example that we've taken for extension data storage is the same real-time example that we saw in our earlier slide, where we were checking out the example for extension level data storage. So the example is going to be this example only, where we are going to get the feedback question and the answer choices as an input from the end user itself, so that it can be stored at extension level, which can later be fetched in a task widget or any other widget location, so that it can be displayed in a Q&A format, or a choice can be provided as a feedback or review for that particular task. So if you remember, we also told that as part of this example use case itself, we can use the entity level data storage concept as well. So once the review is provided, that review is specific to this task. So that can be stored using entity.store method, so that next time this particular task loads, using entity concept, we can retrieve that particular value and display it to the end user. So that's the use case over here. So the benefits over here is essentially that the data is going to be stored at extension level. So it can be fetched across any other widget location in your extension functionality. So this is just a visual representation. In a top band widget, we are going to collect the question and the answer choices from the end user. So once that is done, so extension level data storage will be handled using app.store. Once that is done, it can be retrieved in another location using app.retrieve. So we are going to retrieve it as part of a task entity using app.retrieve and display it in a Q&A format to get a feedback from the end user. So the data flow that's going to occur for this example between the top band widget and your task widget is as follows. So the first step is going to be, you're going to collect the feedback or review template data from the end user. That is the question and the answer choices. So once that is collected, you're going to store it at extension level using app.store. So once you do that, next you have to retrieve it in another location so that you can display it in a Q&A format, right? So the stored data is going to be retrieved using app.retrieve, and that is going to be displayed in our task widget as a Q&A. That is a question and answer. So once that is done, you've retrieved the data in a task widget and displayed it in a Q&A format. The project agent who's working on that task or issue gets the choice to provide a review for that particular task, right? So end user can opt a choice for the feedback question. Now this feedback is going to be specific to this particular task alone. So that data, that is the choice that they are going to provide, can be stored at entity level using entity.store and later retrieved. The stored value can be retrieved using entity.retrieve every time the task widget loads. So next time the end user enters into that task, the choice that they provided as a review for the particular task will be displayed to them. So in this example, both extension level data storage and entity level data storage are handled. So this is the use case flow. When it comes to components, here we essentially have only one component. It's going to be widget, because we don't have any connection. We are not integrating with any other application. So connections are not required. When it comes to widget, we are going to have two widgets. One is going to be the top band widget and the other is going to be our task widget over here. So in the top band widget, you're just going to collect the template input from the end user. So the question and the answer will be obtained, answer choices will be obtained from the end user, and that will be stored at extension level using app.store. In the task widget, we are going to fetch that template data, display it as a Q&A in task entity, and then allow the end user to make a choice. So once, in order to fetch that data stored at extension level, app.retrieve will be used. So once it is retrieved and displayed as a Q&A in the task, they will choose a particular review, right? That chosen data will be stored at entity level, which is a task level, using entity.store method. And finally, when the widget loads again, you can retrieve that data stored against that entity using entity.retrieve. So these are the 4 methods which are going to be used for data storage as part of our top band and our task widget locations for this example. So let me just enter into the Sigma platform again, where we have set up this components ready as part of another extension. So let me enter into that extension. So yeah, this is the extension where we have this particular component set up for our use case. So here there are no connections involved. When it comes to widget, I have one widget in the top band location, which is going to be the template to get the question and answer from the end user. And then we have 2 other widgets. So one is going to be in the task tab and the other is going to be in the issue tab. So when the data is stored at extension level, it can be retrieved in any other location in the extension, right? So we are going to use that feedback or review question and answer in both our task and our issue widgets. So that's the configuration for plugin manifest file. So the code level functionalities are also handled. We have these code details also as part of a forum post, which we'll be sharing with you. Now let me just run this particular example and showcase how the output comes in real time. So the same, using the run option, we are going to enter into our testing portal for this particular extension. So here, since we've included a top band widget, this is the location for the top band. So over here, when I click on this, you can see I have this feedback or review template settings widget, which I've embedded. So on click of that, as an end user, I am asked to enter my feedback or review question for the task or issue. So let me just provide the question. So I'm giving the same question that I had in the sample output over here. So since it's going to be available for both a task or issue, I've given what was the job's level of ease. And then I'm asked to enter the options to be populated for your feedback or review question. So for when it comes to providing a review, let's say we have the options as easy, difficult, and hard. Okay, so now we've provided the input for question and the answer choices. So when I click on add, this data is going to be added. That is, it is going to be stored at extension level using the app.store method. So now that the data is stored, it can be retrieved in any other widget location, right? So we wanted to have it as part of our task or issue. So this is a task available in my Zoho Projects account. So let me enter into the task. So whatever data was given as a question or answer is stored at extension level now. Now in this feedback or review widget, which is available as part of my task, that question and answer which was stored at extension level has been retrieved and displayed as a Q&A format. So since the data was stored at extension level only, we are able to fetch it in another entity as well and display it in the format that we require. So now this is a feedback or review question for this particular task, right? So let's say I give the choices easy for this particular task. When I click on save, this value that was chosen as a review for this particular task is specific to this task alone. So that can be stored at entity level using entity.store method. So now that we've already provided this review for this task, right? So next time as an agent, when I enter into the same task, so marketing research was the task for which we had provided a review. So if I go back to this template, you can see that the data that was saved using entity.store has been retrieved so that it can be populated over here and displayed as the review which was given by the project agent. So we saw that extension data that is stored at app level can be retrieved across multiple locations. So I included it as part of the issues module as well, right? So let me just enter into another issue. So here In the issue also, I have a widget called as feedback or review where I've retrieved the level data stored at extension level and displayed it as a Q&A over here. So if we provide a review over here and click on save, using entity data storage concept, the data can be stored against this specific entity, which is issue. So the next time this particular widget loads, that is you enter into this issue again, you can see that the data is retrieved. Data stored against that specific entity has been retrieved and displayed to us. So in this way, in the same example, we've used both extension level data storage and entity level data storage. So this session's focus was to showcase the importance or the significance of using the data storage concept while you're building the widgets as part of your Zoho Projects extension. So in our previous two sessions and in this session, we've covered concepts like connections, widgets, model boxes, and data storage today, which can be used to build efficient Zoho Projects extension. So in our upcoming sessions, we'll be covering features which are helpful for extension development for other Zoho projects like CRM, books, and desk. So in the details, like in the registration page, you'll be able to view which session is going to come next and which products feature will be used. But across these three sessions, we've covered the features that are significantly playing a role while you're building an efficient Zoho Projects extension.